All right, stretch time. You stand up, move around, wave at somebody. If you got somebody you haven't seen in ages, you can even hug them. I'll just give you permission, and our controller will take liability for. How you doing, Zoomers? Everybody good? All right. Well, welcome again to the Wednesday night Sangha gathering of IMC Charlotte. I'm Larry Dawalt, one of 6 Dharma leaders, and tonight I want to share some thoughts with you on Buddha's last words. This is one of those nights where I have changed from what I was originally planning to talk about to something else because of my response to a recent event. The event was finally, after having this book for about 8 years, I decided to read it a chapter a day and did so over the last 3 months. It's Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Old Path, White Clouds, which is a retelling of the Buddha's life story in story form over the course of 80 years, partly through the eyes of Savesti, who's a little buffalo boy, and partly through the eyes of the Buddha himself. It's drawn directly from Pali, Sanskrit, and Chinese sources, and retold. I don't know how much you've read of Thich Nhat Hanh, but it's retold through the touch of a writer who not only loves the Dharma, but also lives the Dharma. I worked my way through it, sometimes easier than others, but I had no idea how much I would be impacted and really moved by the last few chapters, especially the chapter where the Buddha dies. And I'll share a reading from that chapter in a few minutes, and it will just be a reading. It won't be this much. So those of you who have plans at midnight tonight, you will make it. I've always been interested in history. Any history buffs? Yeah, a little bit. And I'd always hoped to find what I would call an A to Z history of the Buddha's life. Now, there are several respected accounts, including the life of the Buddha according to the Pali Canon, that's Bhikkhu Nanamoli, Footprints in the Dust, the life of the Buddha from the most ancient sources by S. Dhammika, and the New York Times bestseller by Karen Armstrong, simply titled Buddha, which is probably the easiest to read. But even though there doesn't seem to actually be an A to Z account of the Buddha's life, this book comes close, and its ending chapters thoroughly cover the last few months, almost a year of his life, by utilizing a most reliable ancient source, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is Sutta 16 in the Dijjhanikaya, which is translated as the Long Discourses of the Buddha. The introduction to the translation by the Buddhist Publishing Society tells us that of the 34 discourses in the collection of long discourses, the 16th, this one, is the longest. And it's also the longest in the Pali Canon. If you look at this little print when you come up, you'll see that from pages 223 to 277 is quite a little journey. It gives a good idea of the Buddha's teaching too, even though it hardly offers anything that's not found, and often more extensively with the other suttas. But at the end of his life, after almost a century's ministry, 80 years he lived, the Buddha had long since taught all that was necessary for attaining the ideal. Teachings like the Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path, Karma, Three Characteristics of Existence, the Five Precepts, Five Advocates of Cleaning, Dependent Origin, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, the Four Sublime Abidings, also known as the Brahma Viharas, and many others scattered throughout pages and pages, books. Gail reminded me that this book is best used for pressing shirts. A man can just get a lot of use out of the 5 volumes. And his teaching is scattered throughout this sutta also. Because during this last period, he visited at least 15 different towns. And this was on foot. This was going here and there, here and there. But his primary concern was to impress on his followers the necessity of putting the teachings into practice. So this teaching, this tour, if you will, wasn't about him. It was about the teachings. So what did the Buddha actually teach at the end? What he did teach when he finally got to Kusinara, the place of his death, was that he offered 2 teachings that remain deeply relevant for us today. One is the teaching, be islands unto yourselves. Be your own refuge with no other refuge. Take the Dharma as your island, the Dharma as your refuge. Now, these words aren't made to make us feel alone or unsupported. They're an invitation for us to discover our deepest sort of support within ourselves and within the living truth of the Dharma. And telling us to be islands unto ourselves, the Buddha is encouraging us to find stability within and a refuge that's not depending on changing external conditions. Now that can be kind of difficult right now because we've got a lot of changing external conditions in our world, in our country, and so on down. But discovering that living truth of the Dharma, we realize that people come and go, circumstances shift, even beloved teachers and spiritual friends will eventually pass away or at least be out of our lives. So the Buddha says, build an inner refuge. Let your ethical conduct, sila, become the ground beneath your feet. Then the Buddha adds, take the Dharma as your island, the Dharma as your refuge. And here he is wanting to take the attention off himself. I remember reading years ago, don't get attached to a certain teacher, or don't really get to the point where it's all about the teacher. Don't go buying everybody's books, the same person. It's all about the teaching and not about the person delivering it. He's saying, do not cling to me, cling to the truth I discovered. And this is the truth of actually how life is. So we read at the time that his death was nearing, his last individual audience was with a wanderer named Subhada who was staying near Kusinara. He had heard, and the Buddha declared this, that he had heard this was to be the last night of the Buddha's earthly life. So he went to Kusinara to beg Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and primary attendant, for a few moments with the Buddha. Now, backing up just a little bit, the Buddha announced that 90 days from now, his death would take place. We can't do that. In hospice, we use the term 6 months or less should the disease take its traditional course. But even then, that's not always the case. But this had been announced and more people had been gathering. And after a long and meaningful conversation, this wanderer became one of the arahants and the last of the Buddha's direct witness disciples, right there. And after a few more brief instructions, the Buddha addressed the monks who were gathered around him. And I'm going to let Thich Nhat Hanh's book pick it up from that point. After Subhada's head was shaved, he received the precepts and was given a robe and a bowl. The Buddha then looked at all the bhikkhus sitting around him. Many bhikkhus from the vicinity had arrived, and so there were now nearly 500. The Buddha spoke to them, "Bhikkhus, if you have any doubts or perplexity concerning the teaching, now is the time to ask the Tathagata about it. Don't let this opportunity pass by so that later you'll reproach yourself saying, 'That day I was face to face with the Buddha, but I did not ask him.'" The Buddha repeated these words 3 times, but no Buddha spoke. Venerable Ananda exclaimed, "Lord, it's truly wonderful. I have faith in the community of bhikkhus. I have faith in the Sangha. Everyone has clearly understood your teaching. No one has any doubts or perplexity about your teaching and the path to realize it." I wonder what the Buddha thought about all that. But the Buddha said, "Ananda, you speak from faith, while the Buddha has direct knowledge. The Buddha knows that all the bhikkhus here possess deep faith in the 3 gems." Then the Buddha looked quietly over the community and said, "Bhikkhus, listen to what the Tathagata now says. Dharmas are impermanent. If there is birth, there is death. Be diligent in your efforts to attain liberation." The Buddha closed his eyes. He had spoken his last words. The earth shook. Flower blossoms fell like rain. Everyone felt their minds and bodies tremble. They knew the Buddha had passed into nirvana. And then in italic, it's inserted, "Reader, please put your book down and breathe lightly for a few minutes before continuing." And that hit me hard, and I did it. I put the book down. And I invite you to get your breath just a little bit longer for a second or two. The last words are translated several different ways, but the clearest rendering seems to be, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive with diligence. Everything that arises will pass away. Our bodies, our relationships, our possessions, our thoughts and feelings, none of it is lasting." And it's not that this is something to fear, it's simply something to understand. Because when we truly see impermanence, we let go, we stop clinging, and in letting go, we find peace. There's a reason that of all of the teachings, impermanence is the one that was said here at the end. If you don't get impermanence, you got a long way to go. And I remember so much, I'll never forget Gil Fronsdale, a teacher from Redwood, his teaching that there is a land of suffering. It's the land between the way you think things ought to be and the way things are. And that is a land of suffering. In letting go, we find peace, and even the Buddha himself, fully awakened and deeply loved, could not escape that law of impermanence. His dying was a teaching in itself, a demonstration that awakening does not mean escaping change, but living with it wisely. The number one cause of death in the world is what? It's birth. Reach over there and put a gold star on her head. It's birth. And I ask people that, and they think because I've worked in hospice, I know all these statistics, which I know a lot. And that one, it's like, well, smarty, of course it is. But awakening does not mean escaping change, but living wisely with it. Striving with diligence doesn't mean force or pressure. It just means a continuous, caring effort. It means showing up every day. Do y'all remember a few years back when Philip Moffitt was with us on the Zoom, and his talk was showing up for your practice? Remember that? That's the topic he chose. So it must be important. Showing up for your practice. And showing up every day, not perfectly, but sincerely. And it means to remember what matters. But many of us doubt ourselves. We think we're not disciplined enough, not wise enough, maybe not even at times good enough to walk this path. But the Buddha did not give this teaching to saints, he gave it to ordinary people. Yes, there were monastics and kings, but there were also farmers and householders. There were outcasts. And in a society that had followed it for centuries, the Buddha basically said no to the caste system. Nobody was unclean with the Buddha. He saw clearly that every being has the seed of awakening. Every one of us can develop mindfulness, patience, and compassion. The path is already within us. The Dharma is not outside. It's something we uncover. When you're younger, you're taking it all in. When you're older, you're picking out what you need to get rid of in order to find the truth of life. All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive with diligence. Let's sit for a moment.